So we're so happy and so grateful to be here tonight. And thanks so much to Ken and Callie and the Roski team for bringing us here to talk. As introduced, we are Karen Shu and Julie Cho, representing both Omnivore, which is a graphic design studio, and Thick Press, a publishing practice. Our third member of Omnivore, Alice Chung, and our second half of Thick Press, Erin Siegel, couldn't make it to LA tonight, but they are both very much here in influence. So when the four of us began to discuss what to talk about tonight, we started with the idea of service, both in terms of being in service to others and being in service to, or some people say in service of, but we'll stick with two, idealized concepts like care, justice, and craftsmanship. Service turned out to be a generative word, but our conversations never resulted in a clear story with a neat conclusion. That probably wasn't going to happen anyway. Omnivore and Thick Press are pretty comfortable operating in the unknown. In emergence, in questions. Our discussion kept circling back to both practices, so we decided to show you the work of each entity, Omnivore and Thick Press, while speaking briefly to the commitments that animate our work and the process underneath it.
Omnivore started in 2002 in New York City. We've been working from 3 different cities for over 16 years. The story of our studio is peppered with births and deaths, moves and marriages interwoven between studio life. Between the 3 of us, we practice design, collaborate on projects. In and outside of studio, Alice and Julie teach, and we are working mothers. Even with so many interruptions, we have been working seamlessly together for so long, we often think of ourselves as a 3-headed monster. In terms of our studio practice, we collaborate mostly with the creative community and public institutions, architects, artists, educators, filmmakers. Our work ranges from large, like exhibitions and signage, to extra large, to visual identities and brands. We love to illustrate. We love books. And we have found over the years that we feel energized by collaborating on projects that we feel really invested in. We've always been so lucky to work with really nice people, with amazing collaborators, our incredible clients and their teams, and also designers, developers, printers, editors, even our children and husbands. One of our favorite Omnivore lessons is that there is value in all work. The entanglement of life and work has been part of our practice since the beginning. Even with all of life's messy ups and downs, the Omnivore design practice has been an anchor all these years. We all have different relationships to work. As an Omnivore, I often mix the I versus we. We think a lot about what it means to work together. If you don't count a summer being bused to a farm to pick strawberries, my first job was at a Chinese restaurant. I was 14 years old, technically not old enough to legally work, but my parents knew the owners and my employment was somehow attached to the hiring of my older sister. Within the first few weeks, I demoted myself to busgirl. I preferred the quieter yet greasier work of clearing tables and boxing leftovers over dressing up and greeting and welcoming customers at the front door. The evening shift always followed the same format: preparing to open, warming up with the first few tables, finding ourselves slammed with the dinner rush, waiting for the last diners to leave, and then sitting down to dinner. The nightly dinners were my favorite ritual. We would push the long tables together, and the whole staff, owners, hostesses, servers, bussers, cooks, and dishwasher, sat and ate family style. It really was like a family dinner. There are no spatial politics to the ritual sharing of food and having a seat at the table. My husband describes us as blue-collar designers, while there are other ways to craft this description: artisans, experts, bosses. His point is rooted in a philosophical purpose behind the founding of our company. We hold on to the full path of the design process. Corporate design firm and agencies distribute and oversee work with a top-down approach, reflected through titles and salaries: creative director, art director, senior designer, junior designer, production, project manager, account manager, freelancer, etc. Division of labor is nothing new, but maybe accidentally, our process has questioned the organization of creative work. Design process should not mirror machine. Design process is not manufacturing. Corporate design firms can be like kits of interchangeable parts. People come and go. In a small studio such as ours, we occupy every role. We cherish the outside roles of connecting directly with and nurturing client relationships. And our inside roles, inside our computers, we touch every word and vector in our design files. Our work is built from our minds and hands. We share files, we make elements to elaborate or integrate, we sketch and discard, we question, we move forward, we move backward, and we keep moving forward. Our process is a horizontal trajectory where we see every project through from start to finish. Even with an additive and subtractive, sometimes circular process, the horizontality reflects our lack of hierarchy. Working flat is a gift. Parallel practices that come to mind. In describing our work, live in softer spaces. Cooking, quilting, birthing. The beauty of craft is that knowledge and experience can only benefit through time and practice. Over time, through the practice of our practice, we learn from each other. We continue to become better designers. We continue to become better people. We can't think of a better way to grow old. Having this established experience, working at this scale for so many years, has taught us that it's okay when a project doesn't quite work out, or when a relationship can be sticky, or if we feel burnt out and need to say no. we found so much about design is actually about time and trust. In the small business, independent studio, creative economy, we invest our time and trust in each other and our clients. Through this mutual trust and respect, we create space for our projects to grow. This state or feeling of abundance yields the opportunity and possibility to investigate and explore. To reinvent familiar ideas with new meaning. To figure out the riddle of a visual narrative. It can be about materiality and play, where we are all having fun dreaming. Dreaming with each other and our beloved collaborators like Rahul and Lucas. We relish the time to explore ideas, marinate in what we call the middle. Graphic design occupies a strange middle ground, and perhaps this is its appeal. It's a little bit technical, but not mired in math. It's definitely creative, but not paralyzingly open-ended. It's lonely work, but we work together. As a practice that is a profession and also a mindset, its adjacencies include pop culture, cultural culture, commerce, community, social justice, working in mediums, graphic arts, fine arts, craft, the hand, our hands, education, continuing to educate ourselves, all sorts of questions, dreams, lists, the list goes on. This menagerie of tangents opens 1,000 windows. Somewhere out there, someone has written about the word design. How it is to unsign, design, decode, recode. It's a word that is both an action and a thing. Being multiple things at once makes so much sense. We like to think that design is writing with images and image making with text. Recognizing the image-text nature of design felt like we had found a language living in our blood. Experimenting with these languages was like trying on new characters. It was like design as theater or performance. It was through Omnivore that we could recognize our work as a form of translation. Something the three of us have done our whole lives. As the children of immigrants, there are many ways to be.
Oops, sorry.
There is a theory that we recognize words by their shape. Some typographers call it a boma. Reading without reading is such a beautiful idea. This idea applies to other ways we read: form, style, and other adjectives. Design lives at multiple scales: letter, page, word, page, system, object, context, and beyond. The choreography of reading feelings with typographic expression is poetic gesture. As designers, we employ similar devices as poets: structure, form, theme, tone, repetition, rhythm. We change the meaning of what people read through visual language. Is the content really ever just content? We can start with the idea of a letter, how letters form words. Words repeat like a chorus. Sometimes we start with words and a character, and words that suggest character. And build from there. We love to see our work in the world. And how it takes on new life when it is in other people's hands. For us, typography is sound. These lecture series themes become a space to explore the voice of a word through our vision of its meaning. Typography, like music, is like sound set in a system of rules that are both followed and broken. Building by breaking. Here we explore how the shape of the letters and the shape of a word communicates meaning. We can play with the limits of what it means. In this case, creating with our hands. And the limits of readability based on how the origin of our handwork evolves. It's real. The perforation allows one to tear the edges out of the center. To tear, to break, to rebuild. These are also movements. Our space for play lives between the literal and the figural. Images become words built of leaves, feathers, mushrooms, seaweed, moss, mold, insects, hair, our hair. Words become images. A story reveals through typographic metaphor. Here, like lichen. We love saying that, like lichen. Sometimes our work is about the space that is not there. As a way to speak about the interdependence we have as readers, viewers, members of community and society. and sometimes it is about being part of something bigger. Showing the ways we are all connected. Shaped by a shared world that we try to make sense of. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? We are living multiple lives at once. Yet somehow we can make sense of it through each other, together, and with our extended creative family.
So, Thick Breaths was born in 2017 in the desert. Two old friends, a mid-career moment, a longing for less efficiency, less of what the market wants, less of what the funders want, less of what our egos want, and more of what Connie, Subcheck, and Colin Marrow, a pair of intergenerational friends who made a book with us about finding beauty in aging bodies, call magic. Connie describes magic as opening to the mystery. I relax into trusting life, Connie says, and things happen. Erin and I met in high school almost 30 years ago and have stayed friends ever since, across two coasts, through grad school, marriage, kids, loved ones, getting sick, bar mitzvahs, death, and so much lifeiness. Erin is now a social worker and a social work academic, and when we met up in the desert, we were both feeling the weight of neoliberalism in our respective worlds, with its moves towards efficiency and the free market, crowding out magic and leaving no room for support. And with so little support, how do we care for each other lovingly? How are people already caring for one another lovingly? In an attempt to address these questions, we, disgruntled, curious, earnest, playful, hopeful, started a press. We wrote out a manifesto, asking ourselves and others, and eventually our readers, to imagine what might happen if we moved away from critique towards making books with others lovingly and carefully. And so for the past 8 years, we've been working with care workers, designers, and artists to make unusual books about care work and the work of care. We hope that our books, which range from zines photocopied at the corner copy shop to a 512-page, sunset-hued encyclopedia created with over 200 contributors to everything in between, reflect our expansive vision of what making can be: inclusive, unintimidating, and joyful. These inquiries into care work and the work of care have served as structures that become a backbone for a flexible identity. We conceptualize the thick press mark as a metaphor of a thumbprint, incorporating a halftone pattern to represent a printer's mark. The thumbprint can move freely throughout the spine, as if holding the book in different positions. Like care, like the thumbprint, the concept of relationality is the backbone of the flexible ways we think about collaborating with others. Relationality, which has its roots in psychoanalysis, assumes that in any given relationship, we are making meaning together, influencing each other constantly in the context of the space between and around us. Sounds pretty basic, right? Or obvious. But if you think about this idea in the context of power dynamics and the expectations involved in roles, it becomes more complex. If we think in terms of relationality, even the most professional relationships are porous, with our life experiences seeping in, framing how we think and act with each other. This doesn't necessarily mean we need to explore those complicated dynamics with every collaborator as we do with one another. That takes trust, and trust takes time. It just helps us treat ourselves and others with patience and grace. Relationality is also helpful because it is a decentering concept, where a social worker or even a designer's role isn't necessarily to swoop in to solve problems or influence others, but also not to influence either. Relationality also points our attention to the importance of relationships. As publishers, we aren't trying to effect therapeutic change through relationship, but we do recognize that when you tend to relationships, magic happens. Most of our work comes slowly out of relationships with people we've met through our publishing practice, often because they've reached out after feeling connection to our work, or we've reached out after feeling a connection to their work. Each book and each experience of making a book with one another becomes a line of inquiry for us, a way to better understand this practice, this world, and ourselves. Understanding care work, understanding design work, understanding our relationships with each other is so much about understanding how we influence and are influenced by each other. It is vulnerable. Learning from our collaborators about care work, solidarity practices. Sometimes these reflections are straightforward, other times not so much. We appreciate the dissonance that emerges. It's all a part of something we call ongoingness, where even though there's drudgery, even though it doesn't always feel good, we find a way to revel in the process of the practice, writing, editing, making things together. Being in process with each other and also learning and growing with the text and the design, this kind of commitment to a practice is as much about seeking out a life of inquiry as it is about being like kids in a sandbox. In the thick of all this messiness, we are grateful that the codex, the object born of bound pages, provides structure and focus. We are always thinking about identities as a system of constants and variables, constants to create recognition and familiarity, but also variables to create a framework of flexibility. Traditionally, if you look at more modernist identity systems or guidelines, the rules were incredibly controlled. I'm sure if any of you who have worked as designers within these spaces, there's not much freedom to play. But for us, working on something that is so close to us allows a feeling of time and abundance to figure out the rules as we go along. Our zine-like book emerging and printout series can serve as a low-stakes departure point. Smaller print runs allow for multiple page sizes. This allows for folks to shuffle and reshuffle the signatures of content, creating unexpected juxtapositions. We often take kernels of ideas and work together on small projects that snowball into larger projects. Much of our work is polyphonic, often resulting in situations that bring multiple people together around a book. We experiment with the form and content of our projects, and sometimes they emerge into other forms. A project space at an art book fair organized around an enormous movable table. A sound piece.
He had been thinking about the internet and the absence of ceremony around death. Nor had Anthony Bourdain, but for 2 days, all on our phones. A police or school shooting might not even get that much. A week later, it feels like it never happened. As Coleman kept talking, I started looking out the window. I started thinking about how I'd separated the politics of the nursing home from my own life. After interviews, I always want to shake someone and say, how can you put people through the abysses of grief without providing emotional resources? We're not just talking about physical exploitation, we're talking about the exploitation of people's souls. But the nursing home is just a microcosm of my world. How is grief valued in my life? Is it? Growing up, my family talked about grief in terms of how quickly you could get back to work. In the academic part of the city where we lived, there were no vigils. I never saw candles on the street. Now, I take in my friends and sorrows alongside the tragedies of the world every day. In spare moments on the subway, on the toilet, in bed. But I rarely remember what I read. Information, it seems, is not a substitute for grief. Of course. I think I need someone in my life, someone in my real life, someone with power in my life to say, please take a minute. Or I need some kind of value system, some kind of culture, some kind of circle, some kind of march, some kind of protest, some kind of hand on my shoulder in my real life to say, take some time. Please take time. Take time with others. This is as important as drinking water. This is important. To ignore this kills some essential part of you. When the people I interview are forced to rush through relentless loss, they become numb, unable to care for the next resident. I have passed by so many griefs. I am afraid. I am afraid for myself. And I am afraid of not caring because I do care. I care so much about the world. I think I do. No, I do. I really do care, or I want to actually care. And I am really afraid for the world if there are others like me, too.
So these experiments grow onto themselves, which has led us to our most current publication, an encyclopedia, A Radical Helping. December 2019, we met Chris Hoff, who we knew through his podcast, The Radical Therapist, in person for the first time when we were giving a talk at the Southland Institute. Winter of 2019, we finished a book emerging with Chris and his longtime collaborator, Jay Darrigo, about the connections between family therapy and two big ideas: post-oppositionality and compositionism. The book emerging we made with Chris and Jay never emerged into something with one-to-one correspondence, like how the self-care and Ayurveda book emerging we made with self-care coach Gracie Obohowicz and designer Maria Habib corresponded to their longer title, Self-Carefully. But in the magical ways that we can't quite remember, that idea of compositionism that we discussed with Chris along with our love of a good list, plus the lifiness that was happening in my own life, converging with book projects like Stages, about healing and grieving. So this all led to a conversation. Erin remembers being at her daughter's Suzuki violin camp with Chris and Jay on Zoom. And suddenly we had a book title and a call for entries. And 2 years later, a book. This is how we describe an encyclopedia of radical helping. From abundance to zine making, an encyclopedia of radical helping invites the reader to wander through a collection of interconnected entries on helping and healing by over 200 contributors. From the worlds of social work and family therapy, art and design, bodywork and witchery, organizing and education, and more. Privileging co-construction over diagnosis, wisdom over evidence, collective healing over individual cure, yet always blurring categories and embracing contradictions, this world-making collection reveals a pluriverse of helping practices grounded in love and freedom. How does a 512-page book with over 200 contributors from around the world get made? With patience and care. We reached out to our network of contributors who reached out to theirs. We used social media, emails, conversations, showing and telling that Thick Press is a warm space, a supportive space, a place where feedback is less about advice or preference and more about creating spaces for the book and ourselves to grow. Making our own list of entries, inviting folks to come up with different ones too. In our project space at the 2022 Printed Matter Art Book Fair with Chris there and all of Omnivore too, we gathered people's responses to the question, what outside of Western medicine helps you? And then we found ourselves in the thick of so much work. Erin and Chris offering reflections, editing contributions done gently and lovingly. To us, collaboration is very much about trusting collaborators to perform their art and craft. I was looking at ways that information has organized itself over many years throughout cultures. We also talked to our good friend Elias Muhanna. He studies encyclopedias and told us about how some encyclopedias go wide while others go deep. We also learned that our subversive approach to the medium is not a new thing. Diderot's Enlightenment-era encyclopedia critiques religion in ironic ways. For example, The cross-references for anthrophagy, which means cannibalism, sent readers to entries for altar, communion, and Eucharist. For us, the subversiveness was very much about how post-academic this encyclopedia is. No peer review, no set definitions of radical helping. Entries could take on whatever form people wanted. A straightforward entry, a poem, an image, a ballad, and more. We were going for an inclusive zine-like DIY ethos. Which is partly why in the late summer of 2023, we're at the Print and Matter LA Art Book Fair and the New England Art Book Fair in Portland, Maine. We shared a tiny encyclopedia iteration, a zine consisting of 6 entries from social worker Noriko Martinez. We also gathered content related to encyclopedia concepts. Fairgoers wrote and sketched, creating images for the front matter of the book. We had planned for me to have a full book of edited, alphabetized text when I came back from a much-needed hip replacement surgery right after the fair. But that didn't happen, so we had to figure out a way where designing and editing could happen simultaneously. We created and refined and recreated systems of communication and organization. We bristle at spreadsheets, but like the mutual aid organizers interviewed by our collaborator, Mark, we needed to make them work. We gave all contributors 3 pages total with a max word and image count. The grid had to be flexible enough so that baselines and columns could work with the various pieces of content, so we chose a 1 pica grid. We had envisioned that somehow the book would be colored so that it could be immersive and experiential. 1 giant gradient, inspired by the book of Tauba Auerbach. But color is a funny thing and so hard to figure out. What does it mean? Is it functional, distracting, playful, emotional? That kind of design decision making can often be paralyzing, and it was. So we focused on making the spreads instead, page after page, in a kind of joyful drudgery, till we made a first full draft, spiral bound, and in time for a trip to Korea, where I visited my mother and father's ancestral home. And then, in Masan, Korea, one morning, looking for an answer, I took this photo and was reminded about a piece of advice that I received while in graduate school, grappling with what this graphic design thing is and where I fit into it all. I was working on a project about my mother, an actress from the first wave of Korean cinema, her legacy somewhat forgotten post-1970, and figuring out what to do with a treasure trove of archival images. The faculty who I was presenting to, and perhaps a little too enchanted by the images I shared, said that maybe in my future practice, I could always put some kind of reference or photo of my mom in my projects. It was a confusing piece of advice. Why would I ever do that? I couldn't imagine a design project with my hand visible in any way, no less a photo of my mom. But 20 years later, I think I understand what he meant. Sometimes decisions are intuitive and nonsensical. Sometimes you need to put a little of yourself in the work to preserve your sense of self. Artists have that privilege all the time, but we designers grapple with what that means, as we are so often asked to be invisible. So we use that image to create the gradient in the book pages. Every 16 pages, the color shifts, going from gray-blue to pink. and then an email to Chris and Aaron explaining why. I took a photo of the sky the other morning, somewhat hazy and air polluted, but I thought the colors were lovely and it felt like something. How freeing to be able to express an idea that didn't need to be more than something. After that decision was made, we were in production mode, wet proofs, color checking, so many dummy books, blank books constructed by our printer, APO, in Hong Kong. We emailed Abby, our point of contact, countless amount of times. Thank you, Abby. We share these pieces not to fetishize this process, but because all of you who have made a book or collaborated on a project might recognize this. And so we bring this up to say that we see you and share in this collective struggle and joy to get things done. And now that the books are on a container ship somewhere in the Indian Ocean, with a few advanced copies at my house, we are moving into the next phase of our publishing practice, which is all about distribution, both by us and by distributors. In our world of publishing as practice, publishing is very much about gathering a public, and now we are doing that in ways that are both quiet and introspective, like this vitrine show that we installed last week at the Los Angeles Contemporary Archive, where people could see process ephemera from the project. And also at more in-person events, like the soft launch we held this past Sunday at a community arts and therapy space in Highland Park called Scribble. Sunday's event was filled with the kind of magic I mentioned at the beginning when I was talking about our desire for magic in a neoliberal world. This encyclopedia, too, is very much about that desire to reanimate the worlds of healing and helping with magic. Which brings us back here. So this quote from our beloved Ursula Le Guin captures the thing that we long for, spaces that hold process. Conflict, competition, stress, struggle, within the narrative conceived as carrier bag, belly, box, house, medicine bundle, may be seen as necessary elements of a whole, which itself cannot be characterized either as conflict or as harmony, since its purpose is neither resolution nor stasis, but continuing process. Thank you.